The winter air was crisp and laced with the scent of pine and wood smoke, whispering through the tall evergreens that stood like sentinels on the edge of the clearing, their snow-dusted needles shimmering under the golden rays of the setting sun. It was that sacred hour of the day, the golden hour, when the world seemed to pause and let everything become more beautiful, more tender, more real. A rugged cowboy in his 30s sat quietly on the wide wooden steps of his rustic log cabin, the sturdy old structure standing in timeless harmony with the land around it. The cabin, made of thick, weather-worn logs stacked with purpose and precision, was more than just a home. It was a living testament to grit, love, and endurance. From the softly glowing windows behind him, warm yellow light spilled out onto the snow-covered ground, mixing with the last amber hues of daylight to wrap the scene in a magical warmth that defied the winter chill. The man wore a tan work shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the tanned, calloused forearms of a man who worked the land with reverence, and a weathered brown leather hat rested on his head, its brim curved from years of wear, shadowing eyes that held the weight of years and the softness of the present moment. In his arms sat his most precious treasure, his 2-year-old son, a tiny bundle of joy and curiosity wrapped in a thick blue knit sweater, whose curls peeked out from under a woolen cap and whose cheeks were flushed with cold and laughter. Boy nestled into his father's chest with the complete trust and contentment that only a child could possess, one mittened hand resting against the buttons of the cowboy shirt, while the other lazily played with the leather strap of his hat. There was no sound but the hush of the wind and the distant creak of an old pine bending slightly under its snowy weight. The cowboy looked down at his child with a protective, loving expression, not the forced smile of posed photography, but the quiet, soul-deep look of a man whose entire world was resting peacefully in his arms. He didn't speak, but his silence was full of words, the kind of words that didn't need to be said aloud because they lived in the small gestures, in the way his hand gently rubbed the boy's back in slow circles, in the way he shifted just slightly so the cold wouldn't touch the boy's face, in the way he let his breathing match the child's, creating a rhythm only hearts in sync could know. He'd always been a man of few words, shaped by wide-open skies and hard-earned days. But fatherhood had taught him new languages, ones spoken in warmth, in steadiness, in showing up even when tiredness sat heavy on his shoulders. Every wrinkle on his leather hat, every faded patch on his shirt, every splintered step on the porch beneath them, these were the marks of his devotion, his willingness to give his son a life carved out of peace and dignity in a world that often forgot how to be gentle. He thought back to the day his son was born, when the storm had raged outside, but something even wilder had stormed inside his chest, the overwhelming, unexplainable realization that he was now a father. It had both terrified and exhilarated him. And yet, now, holding that same child in the stillness of winter, he could hardly remember a version of himself before fatherhood. The boy looked up at him, big brown eyes wide and full of wonder, his breath fogging the air between them, and the cowboy smiled softly, his gaze lowering to meet his son's with a reverence usually reserved for sacred things. He murmured something, a few low words that no one else would hear, but that would remain forever in the boy's soul, long after he could remember the sound. Perhaps it was a promise, or a dream, or just the reassurance that love like this was real and here and never leaving. Behind them, the log cabin glowed like a beacon of warmth, flickering with the light of a fire that had been burning since morning. Inside, his wife moved quietly, preparing supper with the ease of someone who had long ago learned the rhythm of this life, her heart steady and sure. She would glance out the window from time to time and smile at the sight of them, her husband and son, framed by the light and snow, looking like something out of a dream she once had. This was their life now, simple but rich, carved not from luxury but from the kind of moments that money couldn't buy. The cowboy shifted slightly, adjusting the child in his arms, tucking the little legs deeper into the folds of his coat to guard against the cold. The boy yawned, long and deep, the way only toddlers do, and rested his head against his father's chest, right over his heart. That heart, toughened by time and toil, softened again. The cowboy closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sensation wash over him, the tiny weight in his arms, the light on his face, the silence of the woods, the soft golden snow underfoot, the feel of being exactly where he was meant to be. Out beyond the cabin, the landscape stretched endlessly, rolling hills blanketed in snow, the occasional deer tiptoeing through the forest, smoke curling gently from the chimney as if to mark this little patch of earth as sacred. Every inch of this place was part of him. He'd built the fence around the pasture with his own hands, cleared the brush in the spring, gathered kindling from the woods with his boy riding in a backpack on his shoulders. And though the world beyond this land moved fast and loud, here everything moved to a slower, deeper rhythm. A hawk soared overhead, its wings casting fleeting shadows on the snow, and the cowboy pointed it out to his son, who turned his gaze skyward and whispered. A tiny whoa filled with awe. He chuckled, brushing a kiss onto the boy's curls. "That's right, little man," he whispered. "You keep looking up." He didn't know how long they sat there. Time didn't behave the same way out here. Minutes could feel like hours, or like seconds. But the moment stretched, deepened, burned itself into his memory. Years from now, when the boy was grown and maybe wearing his own weathered hat, maybe sitting on these very same steps with a child of his own, this memory would still live in the way he'd pause at golden hour, in the way he'd hold a child close, in the way he'd breathe in the silence and find comfort in the stillness. The cowboy rocked slightly, not quite moving, just swaying in place like he had when the boy was smaller and cried through the night. But now there were no tears, just peace, trust, love. The sun sank a little lower, dipping behind the trees, casting a deeper amber glow across the clearing. The snow sparkled like dusted diamonds, and the wind picked up slightly, whistling a lullaby through the pines. The cowboy exhaled, slow and long, like he was breathing out everything he didn't need to hold any more: fear, doubt, exhaustion, and inhaling only what mattered now. He looked down again at his son, whose eyes were now drooping, heavy with sleep, lips slightly parted in that innocent way only children have. His small chest rose and fell against his father's, and the cowboy felt the rhythm settle deep inside him, anchoring him. It was a rare kind of peace, a living, breathing thing that couldn't be chased or bought or built. It had to be earned through love, through patience, through moments just like this one. He glanced up at the sky, now melting into soft pinks and purples, and whispered a quiet thanks. Not for the land, though he loved it. Not for the cabin, though he'd built it with his own two hands. But for this fleeting, eternal moment where a cowboy, a father, a man hardened by the world, could simply be still and know that he was loved, needed, and enough. And so he stayed, even as the cold thickened, even as the stars began to blink into existence. Because this was the kind of moment that stitched a life together. This was the kind of moment that mattered more than all the miles he'd ever ridden, more than all the fences he'd mended, more than all the words he'd never said. He held his son close, heart to heart, and let the world spin quietly around them. Asterisk, asterisk, later that evening, the cowboy gently laid his sleeping son in a hand-carved crib beside the warm hearth, the fire casting soft shadows across the log walls. His wife stood nearby, her smile quiet but full, her eyes reflecting the same love he felt in his chest. He brushed a finger across the boy's rosy cheek, reluctant to let go of the moment. Then, without a word, he walked to the window, gazing out at the now moonlit, snow-covered land. The pines stood silent, the world hushed in reverence. He felt the weight of his responsibilities, but even more, the beauty of his blessings. Behind him, his wife wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her head against his shoulder. He closed his eyes. In this quiet cabin, wrapped in love and warmth, with his family safe and near, he was exactly where he belonged. Asterisk.